Station Loomis wasn't the kind of place where chaos was tolerated. No, no, no. This was the Galactic Educational Institute, where young minds from 100 worlds came to be filled with knowledge as efficiently as a cargo ship loading freight. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Everything ran on schedule. Every lesson plan approved by committee. Every educational outcome measured to 3 decimal places. It was beautiful, really. If you were the sort of person who found beauty in spreadsheets and synchronized clocks. Jenna was not that sort of person. She stood at the front of classroom 23B, watching a dozen alien children. Cubs, as the Institute called them, regardless of species, struggle with a concept that should have been, according to the curriculum guidelines, automatically understood via neural imprint technology. The cubs sat in their species-appropriate seating arrangements, their various appendages twitching with what Jenna had learned to recognize as confusion mixed with frustration. All right, let's try this again," Jenna said, perching on the edge of her desk in a way that would have given Volthus, the station administrator, an aneurysm if they'd witnessed it. Proper educator posture was, apparently, a thing. Forget the neural imprint for a second. Pretend you don't have the information downloaded into your brain. Now, Blint, buddy, look at me. What do you think symbiosis means? Blint, a small insectoid whose compound eyes reflected the classroom lights like a dozen tiny moons, pulled his spindly limbs closer to his thorax. His translator chip rendered his clicking mandibles into standard galactic. The data says it is mutual benefit between 2 organisms. Sure, yeah, that's what the data says, Jenna agreed, nodding. But what does that mean? Like, really mean? The question seemed to break something in the room. Several cubs looked at each other. Well, those with eyes capable of looking anyway, with what could only be described as bewilderment. What does it mean? The information had been transferred. The definition existed in their minds. What else could there possibly be? I do not understand the question, Teacher Jenna, Blint admitted, his voice small. Jenna grinned, not the polite, measured smile that the Institute's handbook recommended, but a full conspiratorial grin. Okay, so here's the thing. Let's say you've got a friend, right? And this friend is really good at finding food, but terrible at watching out for predators. And you're amazing at spotting danger, but you can't find food to save your life. So you two hang out together. Your friend finds the food, you keep watch. You both eat, you both stay safe. That, my little multi-limbed friends, is symbiosis. You're helping each other out, because together, you're better than apart. Blint's antennae perked up. Like a story. Exactly like a story, Jenna said, pointing at him. See? You got it. That's understanding, not just knowing. From the back of the classroom, Gruff, a young reptilian whose scales shifted through various shades of green depending on his mood, raised one clawed hand. But Teacher Jenna, the neural imprint already gave us this information. Why do we need the story? Because, my scaly friend, information and understanding are 2 different things, Jenna said, standing up and pacing. Another violation of protocol, but who was counting? You can know something without understanding it. Like, you all know that water is 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, right? Downloaded that on day 1? Nods, and the equivalent gestures from species that didn't have heads that nodded, rippled through the classroom. But do you understand why that matters? Why water is special because of that? Why it does the things it does? Silence. Beautiful, uncertain silence. That's what I thought, Jenna said, but her tone wasn't mean. It was warm, inviting. So let's figure it out together. Shima, what do you know about hydrogen? Shima, the crystalline cub whose body refracted light into soft rainbow patterns across her desk, chimed softly. Her species communicated through harmonic frequencies that the translators converted into words. Hydrogen is the lightest element, the most abundant in the universe. It has 1 proton and 1 electron. Perfect. And oxygen? 8 protons, 8 neutrons in most isotopes, 8 electrons, Shima replied, her chime slightly more confident. Great. Now here's the fun part. When you stick them together in just the right way, you get something completely new. Something neither hydrogen nor oxygen can do alone. Water can dissolve things. It can freeze. It can turn to vapor. It can climb up plants through their roots. Jenna paused, watching the cubs. Why do you think that is? Another pause. Then Gruff, his scales shifting to a thoughtful amber. Because together, they make something different? Exactly. The whole is different from the parts, and that, friends, is one of the most important ideas you'll ever encounter, Jenna said. You can't just download that understanding. You have to think about it, play with it, see how it connects to other things. That's learning. Blint's translator crackled with a sound that might have been excitement. Can we think about other things this way? Oh, buddy, we're going to think about everything this way, Jenna said. And she meant it. What Jenna didn't notice, because she was too busy watching her students' faces light up with genuine curiosity, was the observation panel at the back of the classroom sliding open. What she didn't see was Volthis, all 4 of their arms crossed in a gesture of deep contemplation, watching the scene unfold with their primary eyes, while their secondary eyes recorded everything for later review. What she definitely didn't hear was Volthis murmuring to themselves, "This should not be working." But it was working. Oh, it was working. Over the next few weeks, something strange began happening in classroom 23B. The cubs started arriving early. They started asking questions, not just questions about the lesson, but questions about questions. Why did Teacher Jenna explain things the way she did? Why did stories help them remember? Why did thinking about how things connected make the information feel more real? And then, and this was what really got the other teachers talking, they started teaching each other. It began small. Blint, explaining a mathematical concept to Shima by relating it to the pattern of crystalline growth in her own body structure. Shima, helping Gruff understand historical cycles by comparing them to the molting patterns of his species. Gruff, showing Blint how to approach a problem from multiple angles by physically moving around the classroom and looking at a diagram from different positions. They weren't just repeating information. They were translating it, reshaping it, making it their own. And they were doing it using Jenna's methods: storytelling, metaphor, physical demonstration, questioning. The other educators noticed. How could they not? Cubs from other classes, taught through standard neural imprint protocols, would sit quietly, absorb their daily information packet, and leave. Efficient, measurable, predictable. But Jenna's cubs? They clustered in the corridors between classes, debating. They gestured animatedly, those with limbs capable of gesturing anyway. They laughed. Laughed. In an educational institution. Volthis received the first official complaint on a morning that would have been utterly routine if not for the fact that it shattered the careful equilibrium of their station. The complaint came from Instructor Talween, who taught the advanced physics cohort. The cubs from classroom 23B are disrupting my teaching, Talween had stated, their vocal sac inflating with indignation. They ask why, constantly. Why does gravity work this way? Why is the speed of light constant? Why can't we travel faster? The information has been imprinted. They should simply accept it and move on to practical applications. Volthus had listened, all four hands steepled in front of them, a gesture they'd picked up from observing human diplomatic corps, actually. And what do you tell them when they ask why? I tell them the information is correct and verified. What else is there to say? Volthus had replied, which was administrator speak for, I'm thinking things I'm not ready to say out loud yet. The second complaint came from a parent, Gruff's progenitor to be specific. But this complaint was different. Gruff's parent wasn't angry. They were confused. Administrator Volthus, the large reptilian had said, their scales muted with uncertainty. My offspring has begun asking me questions about my work, about why I make the decisions I make, about whether there are other ways to solve the problems I encounter. This is unprecedented in our family line. Is this normal behavior for cubs exposed to human educational methods? That, Volthus had said slowly, is an excellent question. By the time Volthus decided to observe Jenna's classroom directly, not through recordings but in person, the phenomenon had spread to 5 other cubs from different classes. They'd started congregating around Jenna's students during free periods, listening to them explain concepts using stories and questions and analogies. It was, Volthus thought, as they watched Jenna crouch down to Blint's eye level to discuss why civilizations rise and fall, either the most promising development in galactic education in 3 centuries, or a complete disaster in the making. Possibly both. Teacher Jenna, Volthus said, as the cubs filed out for their nutrition break, their various forms of locomotion creating a symphony of clicks, slithers, and crystalline chimes. We need to talk. Jenna looked up from her desk, where she'd been sketching out a diagram for the afternoon lesson, by hand, with an actual stylus, like some kind of primitive. "Uh-oh," she said, but she was smiling. That's never a good sign. What did I do now? Sit on a sacred artifact? Use the wrong honorific? Forget to fill out Form 338B in triplicate? You, Volthus said, settling into a chair that creaked under their substantial mass, are teaching the cubs to question everything. Yep, Jenna agreed cheerfully. That's kind of the whole point of education, isn't it? No, Volthus said flatly. The point of education, as established by the Galactic Educational Concordat of Cycle 2891, is to efficiently transfer verified knowledge to developing minds, preparing them for productive participation in their respective societies. Jenna blinked. Wow, you guys really suck the fun out of everything, don't you? This is not about fun. It's always about fun, Jenna interrupted, which was probably another protocol violation, but Volthus found they didn't particularly mind. Look, Volthus, can I call you Volthus? I'm calling you Volthus. Here's the thing. Your method works great for creating biological computers. Download the info, store it, retrieve it when needed. Super efficient. Gold star for efficiency. I sense a but approaching, Volthus said dryly. But, Jenna continued, grinning because Volthus had just made what humans called a joke. You're not creating thinkers. You're creating really fancy filing cabinets. And the universe, my four-armed friend, doesn't need more filing cabinets. It needs problem solvers. It needs people, beings, whatever, who can look at something they've never seen before and figure it out. And you believe your methods accomplish this? I know they do, Jenna said, And for the first time since Voltis had entered, her tone was completely serious. Because that's how humans learn. We're born not knowing anything, and we spend our whole lives asking why, why, why. It drives our parents crazy. It drives our teachers crazy. But it works. We're adaptable, because we never stop questioning. Voltis regarded her with all four eyes. Their primary pair focused on her face, while their secondary pair flicked through the data on their wrist display. Your students score 15% lower on standardized knowledge assessments than cubs taught through neural imprint. And how do they score on novel problem solving? Voltis paused. We do not test for that. The curriculum covers all necessary knowledge domains. Novel situations are addressed through consultation with experts. What happens when there's no time to consult an expert? Jenna asked quietly. What happens when the situation is so new that there is no expert? It was a good question. An uncomfortable question. The kind of question that Voltis had been trained their entire career to avoid, because it suggested gaps in the system. And the system was not supposed to have gaps. There is a council meeting in 5 cycles, Voltis said finally, standing. The Council of Educators. They have concerns about your influence on the cubs. You will need to demonstrate that your methods have merit beyond creating disruptive students who question their elders. No pressure, then, Jenna said. Indeed, Voltis agreed. No pressure at all. As they left, Voltis found themselves thinking about something Jenna had said. Biological computers. It was a harsh comparison, but not entirely inaccurate. Galactic civilization had optimized education to the point where learning was instantaneous, efficient, and completely devoid of struggle. Also devoid of joy, wonder, or the peculiar satisfaction that came from figuring something out on your own. Voltis wondered, not for the first time that day, whether efficiency had cost them something important. Something they'd forgotten to measure, because they'd forgotten it could be measured at all. In classroom 23B, Jenna pulled up her afternoon lesson plan and smiled to herself. 5 cycles to prove that curiosity mattered more than data? Challenge accepted. The Council of Educators met in a chamber that looked like someone had asked an architect to design authority and given them an unlimited budget. Curved walls of polished mineral rose to a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time map of the galaxy, each educational institution marked with a glowing point of light. There were thousands of them, tens of thousands, all operating under the same principles, the same methods, the same philosophy that had guided galactic education for longer than most species had possessed written language. And now, one human was suggesting it might be wrong. Jenna stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by a semicircle of educators representing 24 species. Some sat, some stood, some hovered, and one, a gaseous being named Fluum, just sort of existed as a vaguely person-shaped cloud contained in a force field. The diversity was impressive. The expressions of disapproval were universal. Teacher Jenna, Voltis began, their voice echoing slightly in the vast space. You have been summoned to address concerns regarding your pedagogical approach. Specifically, the Council wishes to understand why your students display behavioral patterns inconsistent with standard educational outcomes. You mean why they ask questions? Jenna said, because apparently she'd left her sense of self-preservation back in her quarters. Among other things, came a voice from her left. Nequil, the cognitive specialist who had been monitoring her class through remote feeds, leaned forward, his elongated fingers drumming against his datapad. His species, the Quelm, possessed 3 brains, which supposedly made them exceptional at processing complex information. It also made them exceptionally smug. Your students show decreased efficiency in knowledge retention tests. They score, on average, 15% lower than cubs taught through approved neural imprint methods. Yep, Jenna agreed, because they're spending brain power on understanding instead of just storing. Understanding is automatic when information is properly imprinted, Nequil countered, his tone suggesting he was explaining something to a particularly slow child. The neural pathways are established simultaneously with data transfer. There is no need for this processing period you describe. Okay, so here's a wild thought, Jenna said, turning to face him directly. Maybe understanding isn't automatic. Maybe what you call understanding is just advanced memorization. The chamber erupted. Well, erupted was a strong word. These were educators, after all, trained in professional discourse. But there was definitely a heightened level of animated discussion, some alarmed harmonic frequencies from the crystalline representatives, and Fluum briefly lost cohesion before pulling themselves back together. Volthis raised 2 of their 4 hands, calling for order. Teacher Jenna, that is a significant accusation. Are you suggesting that the Galactic Educational Concordat has been operating under a flawed premise for 300 cycles? I'm suggesting, Jenna said carefully, that you've optimized for one thing, efficiency, and lost sight of something else, adaptability, creativity, the ability to take information from one context and apply it to a completely different situation. That is what expert consultation is for, Nequil said dismissively. When a novel situation arises, cubs, or adults for that matter, consult with those who have relevant imprinted knowledge. This system has served civilization well. Has it, though? Jenna asked. When was the last time your civilization had a major innovation? A breakthrough discovery? A new way of looking at an old problem? Silence. The uncomfortable kind that suggested she'd just stepped on something sensitive. Innovation occurs through systematic research and development, Nequil said finally. Trained specialists work within established frameworks to incrementally improve existing systems, Jenna finished. Yeah, I read the reports. You know what you don't have? Leaps, unexpected connections. Some kid looking at 2 unrelated pieces of information and going, hey, wait a minute, what if we combined these? Because your kids aren't trained to make those connections. They're trained to retrieve information and apply it exactly as instructed. And your students are different? Volthis asked, and Jenna couldn't quite read their tone. Challenging? Curious? Both? Let me show you, Jenna said. The demonstration had been Volthis's idea, or perhaps their test. Jenna suspected both. Either way, she now stood in a smaller observation chamber with the entire council watching through a transparent wall as her cubs filed in, their various forms of locomotion creating that familiar symphony of sound and movement that had become oddly comforting over the past months. All right, crew, Jenna said once they'd settled. Pop quiz. And before anyone panics, this isn't for grades. The council just wants to see how you think. Are we in trouble, Teacher Jenna? Blint asked, his antennae drooping with worry. Nope. They're just curious about you. Ironic, right? Jenna grinned at the observation window. Okay, here's the scenario. You're on a ship. Something goes wrong with the life support system. It's producing oxygen, but not enough. The ship's computer can't figure out what's wrong. What do? She watched as the cubs exchanged glances, those capable of glancing anyway. This wasn't in their curriculum. There was no imprinted solution to retrieve and apply. Shima chimed first, her crystalline body casting rainbow patterns across the floor as she thought. We would need more information. What type of life support system? What are the symptoms of the malfunction? Good question, Jenna said, nodding. It's a standard recycling system. Takes carbon dioxide, processes it back to oxygen. The symptom is that oxygen levels are slowly dropping. Everything else seems normal. Then the problem is not in oxygen production, Gruff said, his scales shifting to that amber thinking color Jenna had learned to recognize. If it was not producing oxygen at all, levels would drop quickly. Slowly means it is producing some oxygen, but something is using it up, Blint finished, his compound eyes brightening. Or removing it. Teacher Jenna, is there a leak in the hull? Computer says no. Hull integrity is fine. The cubs fell silent, thinking. In the observation chamber, Jenna could see Nequil making notes on his datapad, his expression unreadable. Vulthus watched with all four eyes focused intently on the scene. Then Shima did something interesting. She got up, her crystalline form catching and refracting the light as she moved, and approached the other two cubs. "May I ask you both something?" "Sure," Gruff said. "Blint, your species uses oxygen, correct? How much do you breathe compared to, say, Gruff?" Blint's antennae twitched. I am not certain. Less, I think. My body is smaller and my species requires less oxygen per unit of body mass." "And Gruff, your species can hold its breath for extended periods, yes?" "Yes," Gruff confirmed, though he sounded confused about where this was going. "My ancestors evolved in swamps where they had to stay underwater to hide from predators. I can hold my breath for nearly an hour." "So," Shima chimed, her harmonic frequencies rising with excitement, "different species need different amounts of oxygen. Teacher Jenna, could the problem be that something on the ship is consuming oxygen? Not a leak to space, but consumption? Like a chemical reaction, or—" She paused, her body flashing through a rapid spectrum of colors. "Or biological?" Jenna felt a grin spreading across her face. "Keep going." "There could be microorganisms," Blint said, catching on. "Growing somewhere in the life support system. They would consume oxygen as part of their metabolism. If they were reproducing quickly, they would use more and more oxygen," Gruff finished. "And the system would have to work harder to replace it, but could not keep up with an exponentially growing population." The three cubs looked at each other, then at Jenna. "So what would you do about it?" Jenna asked. "Find where they are growing and eliminate them," Shima said immediately. "But carefully, because if they are in the life support system, you cannot simply flood it with disinfectant, or you might damage the oxygen-producing components." "You would need to isolate sections," Blint added. "Test each one, find the source." "And while you are doing that," Gruff said, his scales brightening with satisfaction, "you could increase oxygen production in unaffected areas to compensate for what the microorganisms are consuming. It would buy time." Jenna turned to the observation window and spread her hands in a "see" gesture. In the chamber, Nequil had stopped taking notes. Vulthus's secondary eyes were rapidly scanning through something on their own datapad. The other council members were murmuring among themselves. "That," Nequil said slowly, his voice coming through the chamber's communication system, "was not in their curriculum." "Nope," Jenna agreed cheerfully, "but they figured it out anyway." "Want to know how?" "Please," Vulthus said, and they actually sounded genuinely curious now. Shima used comparative biology, taking what she knows about different species' oxygen needs and applying it to a new problem. Blint connected it to microbiology and exponential growth. Gruff thought about resource management and triage. And they did it together, building on each other's ideas. Jenna looked at her cubs, who were now chattering excitedly about whether their solution would actually work. You can't download that kind of thinking. You have to practice it. The scenario was specifically designed to have no standard solution, Naquil said, but his dismissive tone had lost some of its edge. In reality, there would be protocols. In reality, Jenna interrupted, the universe doesn't care about your protocols. It throws curveballs. It creates situations no one has seen before. And when that happens, you need people who can think, not just remember. Volthis stood, and the chamber fell silent. Teacher Jenna, your cubs will return to their regular schedule. The council needs to deliberate. As the cubs filed out, Blint pausing to ask Jenna if they'd done okay, which nearly broke her heart, Jenna was escorted to a waiting area. It was comfortable enough, with seating options for various body types and a viewport showing the stars beyond the station. She'd been there for maybe 20 minutes when Volthis appeared. The council is divided, they said without preamble. Nequil argues that your methods, while producing some interesting results, are too inefficient for widespread implementation. Others worry about the disruption to established systems. And you? Jenna asked. Volthis settled into a chair, all four arms folding in a complex gesture that Jenna had learned meant deep contemplation. I am troubled by a question I cannot answer. Your cubs solved a problem they had never encountered, using information from disparate fields of study. Cubs taught through our methods would have attempted to find the relevant expert, or consulted the ship's database for similar historical incidents. And if there was no expert, no historical precedent, then they would be helpless, Volthis admitted. We have optimized for a galaxy where all problems have known solutions. But the universe, as you said, does not care about our optimization. So what happens now? Now, Volthis said, standing, you teach another class, tomorrow, with every council member observing. Nequil wants to see if your methods work with cubs who have not been, in his words, contaminated by human teaching philosophy. Oh, good, Jenna said dryly. No pressure. Indeed, Volthis agreed, and Jenna was almost certain they were smiling, or whatever the equivalent was for their species. No pressure at all. But as Volthis left, they paused at the doorway. Teacher Jenna? Your cubs asked me a question as they departed. Blint wanted to know why we were testing them. When I explained it was to evaluate teaching methods, he asked, but why do you need to evaluate if cubs are learning? I told him it was to ensure quality and consistency. Do you know what he said? What? He said, would it not be better to ask if cubs are curious? Because Teacher Jenna says that curiosity means we will keep learning even after the lessons end. Volthis' four eyes fixed on Jenna. When was the last time a cub questioned the purpose of evaluation itself? Probably, Jenna said quietly. Never. Precisely, Volthis said. And that, Teacher Jenna, is what troubles me most. Not that your methods are different, but that ours may have stopped us from asking if different might be necessary. After Volthis left, Jenna sat in the waiting area for a long time, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, humanity was spreading through the galaxy, not through superior technology or military might, but through stubborn curiosity and an inability to accept, because that's how it's done, as a sufficient answer. She thought about Blint's question. Why evaluate if cubs are learning? Because, she suspected, somewhere along the line, galactic civilization had forgotten that learning wasn't just about acquiring information. It was about transformation, about becoming someone who could think new thoughts, make new connections, ask new questions. And you couldn't measure that with a standardized test. Tomorrow, she'd have one chance to prove it. One class, with fresh cubs who'd never experienced anything but neural imprint education. One opportunity to show that curiosity wasn't some chaotic human trait. It was the foundation of real learning. No pressure, right? She laughed, alone in the waiting area, and somehow that made her feel better. The galaxy's education system might be at stake, but at least she could still find the humor in the situation. Very human of her, really. The demonstration classroom was packed. Not with cubs. There were only 8 of them, carefully selected from different species and educational tracks, none of whom had ever encountered Jenna's teaching style. No, the room was packed with observers. Every council member sat in the viewing gallery, their various forms of attention fixed on the scene below. Datapads flickered with readouts. Recording devices hummed. Nequil had even brought additional cognitive monitoring equipment, presumably to measure exactly how inefficient human teaching methods were. Jenna tried not to think about the fact that her entire career, and possibly the future of educational philosophy in this corner of the galaxy, rested on the next 2 hours. No pressure. "Good morning," she said to the 8 cubs, who looked understandably nervous. They'd been told this was a special enrichment session. They had no idea they were about to become the center of an ideological battleground. "My name is Jenna, and today we're going to try something different. Instead of downloading information, we're going to figure things out together." A small amphibious cub, species Jenna didn't recognize, raised a webbed hand hesitantly. "Figure out? But Teacher Jenna, we already have the information. It was imprinted this morning." "I know," Jenna said, smiling. "But here's my question. Do you understand it?" Confusion rippled through the group. The distinction between having information and understanding, it remained foreign to them. "Okay, let's start simple," Jenna said, pulling up a holographic display. "You all learned about planetary formation this morning, right?" Nods all around. "Great. So here's a planet." She displayed a rocky world, complete with atmosphere and oceans. "Tell me how it formed." The answers came quickly, precisely, exactly imprinted. Gravitational collapse of stellar dust, accretion disk formation, planetesimal collision, differentiation of core and mantle. Perfect recall. Zero hesitation. "Excellent," Jenna said. "Now tell me why this planet has water, but that one doesn't." She displayed 2 similar-sized worlds, one blue with oceans, one barren and dry. Silence. The information about planetary formation didn't include comparative analysis. There was no imprinted answer to retrieve. "I do not know," the amphibious cub admitted. "We were not given this information." "That's okay," Jenna said gently. "But you have all the pieces to figure it out. Think about what you know. What does water need to stay liquid on a planet's surface?" More silence. Then, slowly. "Temperature?" "Yes. What else?" "Pressure?" This from a crystalline cub similar to Shaima. "Water boils in low pressure. It needs atmospheric pressure to remain liquid." "Exactly. So what's different about these 2 planets that would explain why one has water and one doesn't?" And then something magical happened. The cubs started talking to each other. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. They compared the planets' distances from their stars. They discussed atmospheric composition. They debated whether the dry planet might have had water once but lost it. They were thinking. In the observation gallery, Jenna could see Nequil furiously taking notes. Vultus sat very still, all 4 eyes fixed on the scene. The other council members leaned forward, watching something they'd never quite witnessed before. Cubs constructing understanding in real time instead of simply accessing it. Then Jenna's wrist communicator buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times. The emergency pattern. Vultus's voice came through, calm but urgent. All educators, we have a situation. Remain where you are. Do not alarm the cubs. Through the observation gallery window, Jenna could see council members checking their own devices, their expressions, those with expressions anyway, shifting to concern. Vultus stood and moved to the gallery's communication panel. "Teacher Jenna," Vultus's voice came through the classroom speakers now. "I apologize, but we must pause the demonstration. There is a technical situation that requires—" The lights flickered. Then the gravity stuttered. Just for a moment. Just enough to make everyone briefly weightless before slamming back. The cubs cried out, various sounds of alarm in various frequencies. Jenna grabbed her desk to steady herself. "Vultus, what's happening?" "Station power regulation failure," Vultus replied, and Jenna could hear the strain in their voice now. "The automated systems are attempting to compensate, but the load is unbalanced across sectors. We are experiencing cascading fluctuations." "Is it dangerous?" A pause. Too long. "Potentially. Engineering teams are responding, but the issue is complex. The system has never failed in this specific configuration before." Of course it hadn't, because the galactic approach to engineering, like their approach to education, was to optimize known scenarios. Novel failures? Those weren't in the programming. Jenna looked at her 8 cubs, frightened and confused. Then she looked at the observation gallery, where the council members were clearly receiving updates, their body language screaming controlled panic. An idea struck her. Crazy? Absolutely. Worth trying? Well, what did they have to lose besides station-wide power failure and possible life support issues? "Vultus," Jenna said slowly, "how long until the engineering teams identify the problem?" "Unknown. They are consulting databases for similar historical failures. But, as I said, this configuration is unprecedented." "Right. Unprecedented." Jenna turned back to her cubs, who were watching her with wide eyes, or eye equivalents. "Okay, change of plans. New problem to solve. Real one this time. The station's power system is failing in a way no one's seen before. The grown-ups are trying to figure it out, but they're stuck looking for answers that match things they've seen before." "Teacher Jenna," the amphibious cub said nervously, "we are just cubs. How can we—" "By thinking differently," Jenna interrupted. "By not limiting yourselves to what you've been told is the right answer. By asking why." She pulled up a schematic of the station's power grid on the holographic display. "This is what we're working with. Power comes in here, gets distributed through these relay nodes, feeds all the station sectors. Something's wrong, but the computer can't figure out what, because it's never happened before." The crystalline cub tilted her head, light refracting through her faceted surface. "If the computer cannot identify the problem, could the problem be with the computer itself?" Jenna's heart skipped. "Keep going." "The computer looks for patterns it knows," the cub continued, chiming with increasing confidence. "But if the failure is new, there is no pattern to match. So it sees the symptoms, but not the cause." "Like looking at the wrong thing," another cub added. "This one reptilian, scales shifting through various shades." "Teacher Jenna, you taught us about perspective, about looking at problems from different angles. What if the engineers are looking at the power failure, but the real problem is somewhere else?" In the observation gallery, Nequil had stopped taking notes. He was listening. "The system has never failed in this specific configuration," a mammalian cub repeated thoughtfully, her fur bristling with concentration. "But Teacher Jenna, you said the computer is trying to compensate." What if the compensation itself is the problem? What if it is making things worse? Jenna's eyes widened. She touched her communicator. Vulthus? The Cubs have a theory. What if the automated compensation protocols are actually causing the cascade? Each time the system tries to fix one imbalance, it creates another somewhere else? Silence on the other end. Then, that would explain why each intervention seems to worsen the overall stability. But we have always trusted the automated systems to optimize. Yeah, well, maybe optimization isn't always the answer, Jenna said. Sometimes you need to stop trying to fix it and let it reset. Can you manually shut down the compensation protocols and rebalance the load from scratch? More silence. Then, faintly, she heard Vulthus relaying the theory to the engineering teams, discussing, debating. The lights flickered again. Gravity hiccuped. Then Vulthus's voice, decisive. We are implementing the solution. Manual override in progress. The Cubs waited, barely breathing, those that breathed anyway. Jenna found herself holding her breath, too. In the gallery, every eye was fixed on status displays. The lights stabilized. The ambient hum of the station's systems smoothed into their normal rhythm. Gravity settled and stayed settled. Power levels normalizing, Vulthus announced. The cascading failure has stopped. Station is stable. The Cubs erupted in cheers, their various forms of celebration creating a chaotic symphony. Jenna let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. In the observation gallery, Nequil sat frozen, staring at his datapad. Vulthus stood at the window, all four hands pressed against the transparent barrier, looking down at 8 Cubs who had just done what an entire team of expert engineers with centuries of collective experience could not. They had thought their way through an unprecedented problem, and they had done it by asking why. The council chamber felt different this time, less like a courtroom, more like, well, Jenna wasn't quite sure what. But Nequil wasn't drumming his fingers dismissively, and Vulthus had something that might have been a smile playing at the edges of their expression. Teacher Jenna, Vulthus began, the council has reached a decision. But first, I must ask you the question that has been troubling me since this began. Why do the Cubs copy your words? Jenna took a breath. This was it, the moment everything came down to. Because they're curious, she said simply. When you give someone information, they can take it or leave it. But when you make them curious, when you help them discover something themselves, they own it. It becomes part of how they think, not just what they know. And when Cubs see someone asking questions, wondering why, figuring things out, they want to do it too. Not because I'm ordering them to, because curiosity is contagious. Nequil leaned forward, his 3 brains apparently working in concert for once. Our civilization has not had a major breakthrough in 300 cycles. We attributed this to having solved the primary challenges of our era. But perhaps, he paused, and Jenna could see the wheels turning. Perhaps we simply stopped asking the questions that lead to breakthroughs. You optimized yourselves into a corner, Jenna said, not unkindly. You became so good at solving known problems that you forgot how to approach unknown ones. And in a universe that's constantly changing, constantly surprising us, that's dangerous. Which is why, Vulthus interjected, all 4 hands spread wide. The Council has decided to implement a trial program. Human-style curiosity education, integrated with our efficiency-based knowledge transfer. We will train educators, including those from species other than human, in your methods. Jenna blinked. Wait, really? The cubs saved the station, Nequil said flatly. 8 cubs, with less than 2 hours of exposure to your teaching philosophy, solved a problem that our expert engineers could not. The evidence is compelling, however much it pains me to admit it. But here is what troubles me most, Vultus continued, and their voice carried something Jenna hadn't heard before. Hope. For the past cycle, I have been observing not just the cubs, but the educators. And do you know what I have noticed? What? We have started asking why, Vultus said quietly. About our methods, about our assumptions, about whether efficiency and understanding must be mutually exclusive. Your cubs taught our cubs, but perhaps more importantly, they gestured to the assembled council. Your cubs taught us. 6 months later, Jenna stood in a newly renovated wing of Station Loomis, watching as human educators, 20 of them now, prepared for their first classes. But they weren't the only ones teaching the new methods. Vultus had become an advocate, adapting curiosity-based learning for their own species' cognitive patterns. Even Nequil had reluctantly admitted that asking why occasionally produced insights his 3 brains alone could not. The real surprise came from Blint. The timid insectoid cub had become something of a celebrity, the first student to teach a class of adult aliens using question-based learning. Jenna had watched through the observation window as he guided a group of engineers through a problem, never giving answers, only asking better questions. Teacher Jenna? It was Shima, her crystalline form reflecting the corridor lights. She was taller now, growing fast. I have a question. Hit me, Jenna said, smiling. Why did it take so long for the galaxy to learn this? Humans discovered curiosity-based learning thousands of cycles ago. Why did no one else? Jenna considered this. You know what? I don't know. Maybe because most species found faster ways to transfer knowledge and stopped questioning whether fast was the same as good. Maybe because asking why takes longer than just accepting the answer. She looked at Shima. What do you think? Shima's chime rose with what Jenna had learned was delight. I think perhaps we were so busy being efficient that we forgot to wonder if we were being wise. Kid, Jenna said, putting a hand on Shima's crystalline shoulder. That might be the smartest thing I've heard all week. As Shima chimed off down the corridor, Jenna looked out the viewport at the stars beyond. Humanity's gift to the galaxy wasn't strength or technology, or even stubbornness, though they had all of those in abundance. It was the simple, revolutionary act of asking why, and then, when the answer wasn't satisfying, asking why again. Because curiosity, Jenna had learned, wasn't just about finding answers. It was about never running out of questions.